Well, tonight we want to move beyond that to try to answer that most unanswerable of questions. What on earth is actually going to happen? And we're joined here in the studio at the whiteboard by Hannah White from the Institute for Government, Stephen Bush of the New Statesman, and LBC broadcaster Iain Dale. And there's one simple rule here. These guys aren't allowed to tell us what they want to happen next. Instead, they'll try to lay out what they think actually will happen. Using our extraordinary whiteboard, you can see how careful we've been with your licence fees. So, Stephen Bush, can you lead off? What do you think is going to be the path through this next fortnight?
Well, I think the first thing that's going to happen is obviously there'll be a vote on this withdrawal agreement right here. So we'll start here. And basically, the majority of people in the Commons want to avoid two things. They want to avoid May's deal, but they really, really want to avoid no deal. So what I think is going to happen is the first thing is you'll have a big no vote to May's deal.
Probably around the 10th of December?
Probably around the 10th of December. I don't think there'll be a Tory leadership election. In the House today, you could really hear that although there's a large minority who don't like the deal, the majority of the party is rallying behind Theresa May in a way they weren't even a week ago. So the next thing will happen is the Labour Party is going to desperately try to trigger a general election with a no-confidence vote. And then what's going to happen is they're just going to bounce straight off the Fixed-Term Parliament Act. Then a bunch of pro-Europeans are going to try and get a second referendum, and they're going to bounce right off the fact there aren't enough votes for it. And then all this time's going to be tick, 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 ticking to no deal. But no one wants that. So eventually, some Labour people, some second referendum people, some people who don't like May's deal are going to have to hold their noses and vote for May's deal in order to prevent that. I think that's what will happen.
Hannah, follow the bouncing ball was almost Stephen's version, but what's yours?
Well, I'm going to give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt and say there's an outside possibility of a yes vote, but no one in Westminster seems to think at the moment that that's going to happen. So I think what's more likely is that the meaningful vote that Parliament is being given by the government is going to start out with a no vote. But the important thing about that is that it's not actually a yes-no vote. It's a vote where parliamentarians get to put down amendments. And what's going to be really important when this vote takes place is what it reveals about where the other majorities are in the House of Commons. And so it's going to tell us a lot, and it's going to inform everyone's thinking. But it's going to inform the Prime Minister's thinking about whether everyone's going to be really shocked if there's a no vote, and maybe she can just try again straight away, or whether, if she gets the chance, if, as Stephen says, there are other things that throw her off course, if she wants to try for an amended deal and offer a different...
Or go back to the EU.
Go back to the EU. There's limited time for that, and then put an amended deal back to the House. I'm not going to go beyond that, because I think those are the two options that she'll have at that stage, either to go straight back and say, look, this is my deal, take it or leave it, or to offer the House something different.
Before we pick up with Iain, if these amendments go in, and there are lots of them, do you think Parliament can actually manage the complexity of what has to happen next week and the beginning of the week after?
Well, I think the Speaker will play a role in that, in the way he always does. So the Speaker has to take a view on which amendments there may be a significant interest in. He has to balance the interests of minorities, people who need to be able to express their view, and the interests, and think about where there might actually be a majority view.
All right, Iain, you're up.
Well, I think that there's undoubtedly going to be a no vote to begin with. I don't think there's any question about that. I think it's just a question of the size of the majority, which I think could be a lot larger than people are thinking. Now, there are two options then. Parliament could mandate Theresa May to go back to Brussels, but there is no prospect that the EU is going to waver there and give her a better deal than they're giving now. So I don't agree with Hannah that that's a possibility. I think there is something that comes in between this, and that is, as Stephen said, a confidence vote. I interviewed Keir Starmer tonight, and he more or less said, yeah, that's what he didn't say, yes, we would definitely do it.
Well, feel free to mark that on the board.
Let's put a con there, confidence vote. Now, Theresa May will probably win that, but bear in mind that this is her flagship policy. And most prime ministers in these circumstances would probably think about resignation at that point. Now, I'm not going to predict that she will resign, but what I would predict is that those 48 letters will be in within a couple of days. Now, I still think she would win that leadership election vote, but the margin, I think, would be relatively narrow, much narrower than it would have been if there'd been a leadership election now. So if she survives that, what then? And I don't know what then. And I think all of us can probably agree that we actually don't know what will happen. There are so many imponderables here that it's very difficult to see what would happen, and it will be on a day-to-day basis. I mean, events will take their course.
How long would a leadership
profound,
election... Well, no, it's great. How long would a leadership election normally take? And do you think it could be running on in parallel with some of these other things, like trying to get amendments or...
The big danger of a Tory leadership election is that it will take the normal 3 months. Now, I've talked to some people quite high up in central office who said, well, they wouldn't concertina. It has to go to the party membership. There's no talk of somebody being crowned like Theresa May was. I think they could concertina it into probably a month to 6 weeks if they really wanted to. But even then, that would mean that a new leader would come in, probably want to try and go back and tweak the deal at least. They can't do that before March the 29th, so a new leader would probably have to try to withdraw Article 50. Now, Theresa May could never do that, and she might have to say, in these circumstances, she would try.
Article 50?
Well, or postpone it, I mean. And, I mean, imagine the consequences of that. And in a leadership campaign, all the candidates are going to be asked that question. Boris Johnson has already mentioned that he would do that. But I'm not sure any candidate who says they'll do that would win.
Thanks. Stephen, just hearing what Keir Starmer was saying this evening, what Mel Stride was saying this evening, if the government did make meaningful concessions on, for example, a customs union, one or two other issues of concern to the Labour Party, could they just kick it in effectively to the political agreement? Could they say, well, yes, of course, we'll agree now with you that that's what we'll do, and turn a lot of Labour MPs to vote for it in that way?
Well, yeah, the kind of escape hatch for the government is the political declaration. Not binding at all, just some warm words about the future relationship. But by changing that, you can potentially see how a bunch of Labour MPs can be moved over. I think in the first vote, however, the Labour Party feels it has to show to its own voters that it's trying to force an election, that it doesn't like this Tory Brexit, etc., etc. So whatever happens, all of that stuff can only really come into play after the Labour Party has had its demonstration of its good intent to its Remain voters.
Hannah, I mean, a lot of this is, I presume, in parliamentary terms, virgin territory. I mean, what are the dangers here of miscalculation? I mean, we were just talking about how long a Conservative leadership contest might last.
Well, I think the really important thing to bear in mind is that all the defaults at the moment are set to no deal. So actually, what needs to happen if no deal is not going to happen is we need to have a meaningful vote, which needs to pass, and then the Parliament needs to pass a piece of legislation. We need to agree a treaty. And that will have to happen before Article 50 runs out. And the point about Article 50 is that the EU have to unanimously give us an extension. It's not just up to us to ask.
Not just for a Tory leadership contest. No, Iain, last word.
The point also is the Clerk of the House of Commons, Sir David Natzler, has said that any amendments to this motion that we'll get on December the 10th, frankly, aren't worth anything because Parliament can pass all the amendments it likes, but in the end, it's the government. The legislation governs that if there isn't a deal, we have to go to no deal. So Hannah's absolutely right. There would have to be primary legislation to stop that happening.
None of you, I've noticed, have mentioned the second referendum really as a runner in this. Too complex, too...
There aren't enough Conservatives who would vote for it. There will be about 25 Labour MPs who would not vote for it, even if Jeremy Corbyn changed his mind, which is a pretty big if.
It'd be more than that.
And there's no way that there are enough Conservative MPs floating around to get it over the line.
There'll be a lot of noise about it over the next few weeks, an increasing noise, but it ain't going to happen.
Thank you very much. Iain Dale, Hannah White, Stephen Bush, thank you all very much for joining us and plotting that through. Fascinating.